I'm not one to put my personal life on the internet, but honestly, I just need a vent. Maybe outlining it will help make sense of the situation, or maybe someone else is going through something similar. Either way, here's my story. I'm 36 years old, and up until a few months ago, I thought my life was pretty solid. I've been with my girlfriend, let's call her Kayla, for almost 4 years. She's 28, a fitness trainer, and one of those people who can walk into any room and turn heads. When we first met, I was shocked that someone like her could be interested in me. I'm not bad looking, but I'm also not the pumped-up gym guy that usually surrounded her. I work in IT, a stable job, decent pay, but not flashy. She used to joke that I was her rock solid, the guy who kept her grounded. I love that about us. Throughout most of our relationship, we had the usual ups and downs, but nothing serious. We talked about getting married someday, starting a family and all that. Kayla was always good at planning for the future, especially when it came to money. She had a spreadsheet where she accounted for everything: vacations, savings, investments. I thought it was practical at the time, but looking back, I think it was a red flag that I ignored. Things started to change when my mom got sick. She is 68 years old and was diagnosed with early-stage dementia last year. My father died when I was a teenager, so for a long time it was just my mom and me. She had always been independent, but when her memory started to deteriorate, it became clear that she wouldn't be able to live on her own for long. I brought it up with Kayla because, she's my partner. I decided that we could handle it together. She was supportive of me at first. She would say things like, "We'll figure it out," or "Your mom's lucky to have you." But when the conversations got more serious, her tone changed. I mentioned selling my mom's house to cover the cost of a good nursing home, and that's when things went south. Kayla didn't like the idea at all. She thought it was cold to put mom in a nursing home and said we should hire a caregiver instead. I tried to explain that a nursing home would provide 24/7 care, and it wasn't about leaving mom somewhere, but about giving her the best quality of life possible. But Kayla persisted, accusing me of selfishness and saying that I just didn't want to take on the responsibility. From then on, the arguments got worse and worse. One night, after a particularly heated discussion, she said she thought selling the house was a waste of money. She suggested we use the money for something better, like a down payment on our own house, or even investing it for the future. I was stunned. It wasn't about my mom's well-being, it was about money. From that moment on, the relationship between us became different. She started spending more time at the gym, sometimes for hours at a time. I told myself it was her way of blowing off steam, but deep down I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. She'd come home late, saying she'd stayed up late talking to someone, and when I asked who, she'd wave it off like it didn't matter. I didn't want to be the paranoid guy, so I let it go. But one night I needed to order dinner, and I couldn't find my phone. Kayla's phone was on the counter, so I decided to use it to order pizza. And that's when I saw the notifications. Messages from someone named Mike, with little winking emoji and phrases like, "I can't wait to see you tomorrow." My stomach churned. I didn't argue with her right away. Instead, I spent the next couple of days playing detective, checking her social media and paying attention to her behavior. As it turned out, Mike was a guy from her gym, a personal trainer. I recognized him from the few pictures she posted. He was always in the background and always smiling too much. When I finally told her about it, she didn't even try to deny it. She said she felt neglected, and that Mike was there for her when I was too focused on mom. She tried to make it seem like I was the one who pushed her away. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. It wasn't just about mom anymore. It was about who Kayla really was. The worst part? She admitted that the money from mom's house was part of why she stayed. She thought we would sell it and use the proceeds to start a life together. And when she realized that wasn't going to happen, she said she felt trapped. After hearing her words, I broke down. That night I ended the relationship, packed my suitcase, left, and never looked back. It's been a few months now, and I'm still picking up the pieces. My mom is in a great nursing home and is doing well, as you would expect. As for me, I'm trying to move on with my life, but the betrayal still stings. In retrospect, I didn't pay attention to the many warning signs. I wanted to believe we were building a life together, but it turned out we weren't even on the same page. Kayla was preoccupied with herself, and I was just a stepping stone. If you're reading this and are in a similar situation, trust your intuition. People show who they are if you are willing to see it. I wish I had done this sooner. I'll be honest. I never had to make such a big decision before all of this. Sure, I chose a major in college, picked out my first car, and decided what city to live in when I got my first job. But those were the kind of decisions where if you screwed up, you could fix it. In this case, it was different. When my mom's doctor told me she had early-stage dementia, I felt like someone had pulled the rug out from under my feet. Mom was always witty, the kind of person who can remember the smallest details of a conversation from years ago. The thought that she might forget something important, like whether she'd taken her medication or left the stove on, terrified me. I didn't say anything to Kayla at first. I needed a few days to figure things out on my own before initiating her into what was going on. When I finally told her, I figured she would understand. After all, she had always talked about how much she valued family and how important it was to take care of those you loved. For a while, it seemed that way to me. The first few weeks after my diagnosis were tough, but manageable. I started spending more time at my mom's house, checking on her, helping her organize things so she wouldn't forget where she put her keys or the remote. A couple times I had Kayla come with me, who seemed genuinely supportive. She would sit with my mom and chat, sometimes even bringing her food. I felt like I hit the jackpot with her. But as the months went by, my mom's condition began to deteriorate. I'd get calls from neighbors saying she was wandering around the yard looking for her cat, who had died years ago. She would leave the refrigerator door open or forget to eat. It became clear that she could no longer live alone. That's when the real conversations with Kayla began. I told her I was looking into nursing homes that specialized in assisted living. I did my research and found a few places that I thought would take good care of her. They weren't cheap, but I had already figured out how we could afford it. Mom's house was fully paid for, and selling it would more than cover the cost. It wasn't an easy decision, but it seemed like the right one. Kayla's reaction caught me off guard. "Are you really going to sell her house?" she asked in a harsh tone. I explained that it wasn't just a house. Mom was going through too much right now, and the money from the sale could be used to provide her with the care she needed. But Kayla didn't see it that way. "She raised you there. You don't think she'd want to keep it in the family, do you?" I tried to remain calm. "What's the use of keeping it if she can't live in it? She needs professional care, Kayla. It's not something I can handle on my own, and neither can you." She didn't say anything after that, but I could tell she didn't agree. Over the next few weeks, every time I broached the subject of a nursing home, Kayla recoiled. She kept suggesting that we hire a caregiver who could come to my mom during the day and help her with meals, medications, and other things. At first it seemed like she was just trying to compromise, but the more we talked, the more I realized that she wasn't thinking about my mom at all. Kayla kept talking about how much cheaper it would be to hire a caregiver. She even did the math for me, showing me that it would be cheaper than half the cost of a nursing home. At first I appreciated her efforts, but then I began to notice a pattern. Whenever she talked about saving money, she would turn the conversation to us, how we could use the extra money for a vacation or save for our own home. It was unnoticeable at first, but over time it became obvious. She wasn't concerned about my mom's well-being. She was concerned about how my mom's money, or lack thereof, would affect her future. This realization came down on me like a ton of bricks. One night, after another argument about the nursing home, I finally spoke my mind to her. "Is this really about my mom, or is it about money?" Her face turned red, and for a second I thought she was going to deny it. Instead, she became defensive. "I'm just trying to make sure we're not throwing money away. What's the point of selling her house if we can use that money to build our future? Your mom doesn't need to live in some fancy place. She needs someone to help her with basic things." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "She needs professional care, Kayla. It's not about convenience or saving money. It's about giving her the best quality of life possible." She rolled her eyes. "You're being dramatic. A lot of people take care of their parents at home. You're just looking for the easy way out." That hurt. I'd always considered myself a pretty responsible guy who took care of the ones he loved. Hearing her accuse me of selfishness, especially when I was trying to do the exact opposite, was a slap in the face. After that, the fights became more frequent. Kayla started spending less time at my house and more time at the gym. She said she needed to blow off steam, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something else was going on. Whenever I asked her about it, she would brush me off or change the subject. At one point, I tried to talk her into coming with me on a tour of one of the nursing homes I was considering. At first she agreed, but when the day came, she declined at the last minute, saying she had things to do. At that moment, I realized I couldn't count on her. Looking back, I think that was the beginning of the end. I just didn't know it yet. Honestly, I'm still not sure what hurt more. The fact that she failed to support me when I needed it most, or the fact that she tried to spin the situation to her advantage. Either way, it was clear that we were no longer on the same team. And that's not easy to swallow when you consider someone your partner. I didn't expect that. That's the part that still bugs me. Months later, I'd been with Kayla for years. I thought I knew her values, her quirks, the way she took care of her family. But when my mom's illness forced us to have difficult conversations, it was like she turned into someone I didn't recognize. It started out small. At first I thought she was just trying to look out for me, maybe even lighten the load a little. After all, my mom's diagnosis of dementia wasn't just a curveball. It was a real wrecking ball. Everything changed overnight. Suddenly I had to deal with doctors, legal documents, and decisions I didn't even realize I had to make. Kayla had always been a planner, and I respected that. She loved planning everything, whether it was a vacation or a weekly grocery shopping trip. So when she started asking questions about my mom's house, I didn't pay much attention. She would say things like, "Have you thought about what you're going to do with it yet?" Or, "Are you sure selling is the best option?" At the time, I figured she was just trying to help me think things through. But then the questions turned into suggestions, and the suggestions turned into arguments. One night, we were sitting on the couch after dinner. I had just gotten off the phone with a realtor who specialized in estates similar to Mom's. Kayla asked how it went, and I told her I was starting to feel more confident about selling the house. At which point she gave me a look of dismay. "Have you thought about how we could use this money?" At first I was confused. "Use the money?" I asked. "For what?" "For us," she said as if it was the most obvious thing in the world. "We could finally put together a down payment on a place of our own, or go on a trip somewhere. You know, make the most of it." I just stared at her, trying to figure out what she was saying. "Kayla, that money isn't for us. It's for taking care of my mom. You know that." She sighed, as if I was the one being unreasonable. "I'm not saying we'll take it all. Just so much to make it easier for us. Your mom wouldn't want you to struggle, would she?" I didn't even know how to respond. It seemed like she was talking about monopoly money, not the house my mom had lived in for over 30 years. The house that held all of our family memories, the place where I grew up, where we celebrated Christmas and birthdays. And now Kayla was talking about it like it was a piggy bank we could break for our own gain. The more we talked, or argued, really, the clearer it became that she wasn't going to put up with it. A few days later, she brought it up again, at first in passing, as if checking to see what was going on. "You know, if you sell the house, you'll have a lot more money than you need for a nursing home. Those facilities aren't cheap, but they're not that expensive either. It would be crazy not to put some aside for us." I tried to stay calm, but it was getting harder and harder. "Kayla, this isn't about us. This is about my mom getting the care she needs." She rolled her eyes. "Yeah, but you're going to spend all that money on some overpriced house? What if she doesn't even like it there? Wouldn't it be better to leave her at home with a caregiver and spend the rest of the money on something meaningful?" I couldn't believe what I was hearing. She wasn't just suggesting alternatives. She was actively trying to steer the conversation away from what was best for my mom to what was best for her. It seemed like every time I tried to explain why a nursing home was the right choice, she found a way to turn the conversation to money. The turning point came about a week later. We were having dinner, and she brought it up again, this time without even trying to sugarcoat it. She said something like, "I just don't see the point in throwing all this money away when we could finally start building our lives. Your mom won't be around forever, but we will." I almost choked on my drink. "What the hell does that mean?" I asked, with my voice coming out louder than I intended. She looked around, embarrassed that I'd drawn attention, and leaned closer. "It means we have to think about our future too. You act like it's all about her, but what about us? What about everything we've worked for?" At that moment, it hit me. Kayla wasn't just practical or short-sighted, she was selfish. All that talk about family, about building a life together, about supporting each other no matter what. It was all just lip service. When it came down to it, she didn't care about my mom or what I was going through. She cared about what she could get out of the situation. That night, I left the restaurant without finishing my dinner. I needed space to think, to make sense of what was happening. The woman I thought I was going to marry, the person I trusted the most, was showing me a side of herself I'd never encountered before. And it wasn't pretty. Over the next few days, things between us got even worse. She started avoiding me, spending more time at the gym or with friends. When we were together, it felt like we were speaking different languages. Every conversation turned into an argument, and every argument boiled down to the same thing: money. Looking back, I think deep down I knew it was the beginning of the end. But I wasn't ready to face it yet. I kept telling myself that maybe she was just stressed, or scared, or depressed by everything that was going on. Maybe if I gave her some time, she'd come to her senses. But the truth was that Kayla wasn't going to change. She made it clear where her priorities were, and they weren't with me or my mom. They were about herself. And when you see the true face of a person, you can't not see it anymore. It was only a matter of time before it all fell apart. I just didn't know how bad it would be. I don't know when I started to notice it. Maybe it was one of those things that creeps up on you gradually, so subtly that you don't even realize it until it catches your eye. But in retrospect, all the signs were there. I just didn't want to see them. Kayla and I argued a lot, mostly about my mom, the nursing home, and of course, money. It felt like we were on two different planets. Every conversation turned into an argument, and after each argument, I felt even more exhausted than the last. But even with all the tension between us, I didn't think it would come to this. At first, it had come down to little things. Kayla had always been into fitness, so her time at the gym wasn't unusual. She was the kind of person who genuinely loved working out, the kind of person who could spend 2 hours on a Stairmaster machine and consider it a good day. I used to admire her, how dedicated she was to staying in shape. But lately, her gym schedule has gone from purposeful to obsessive. She started going there more often, staying longer and talking about it all the time. "I reached a new record in squats today," she'd say, or, "You wouldn't believe how crowded it was this morning." At first I thought it was just her way of coping with stress. After all, everyone has their outlet, right? For me it was games or car rides, for her it was the gym. But then she started mentioning someone new. A boyfriend. It started innocently enough, just a passing comment here and there. "Mike spotted me on the bench today," or, "Mike said I should try this new protein powder." I didn't pay much attention to it at first. Kayla had always been friendly, the kind of person who makes friends anywhere. I wasn't jealous and I trusted her. At least that's how it seemed to me. But as the weeks went by, I started to notice a slight change. She came home later and later, always with some excuse. "I lost track of time," she'd say, or, "We were talking after class." When I asked who that "we" was, she waved it off like it didn't matter. "Just someone on the gym team," she'd say. The more I paid attention, the more obvious it became. Her phone was practically glued to her hand, and she was constantly smiling as if she was reading something funny. When I asked what was so interesting, she would shrug and reply, "Just a meme," or all sorts of group chats. One night I decided to ask her directly. We were sitting on the couch, half watching some Netflix show, and I turned to her and asked, "So who is this Mike you keep talking about?" She didn't even look up from her phone. "Oh, he's just a trainer at the gym. He helps me out sometimes." "That's it?" I asked, trying to keep my tone casual. She finally looked up, a flicker of irritation on her face. "Yes, that's it. Why do you ask?" "I don't know," I said, trying to pretend I didn't know. "You just mention him a lot, that's all." She rolled her eyes. "You're just being ridiculous. He's just a friend." That should have been the end of it, but it wasn't. Her defensive stance only heightened my suspicions. I started looking at her more closely, not because I wanted to catch her doing anything wrong, but because something in my gut was telling me that things weren't adding up. A few days later, I walked into the gym on my lunch break. I didn't usually do this. I'm more of a weekend exerciser, but I figured it would be a nice surprise. Maybe we could have a cocktail or something afterward. When I got there, I spotted her almost immediately. She was standing on the squat rack, laughing at something Mike had said. He was standing a little too close, his hand resting lightly on her back as if he was guiding her form. She didn't seem to mind. I felt like someone had punched me in the stomach. I wanted to walk over to her and say something. But what? Hey, get away from my girlfriend? I didn't want to be that guy. Instead, I just stood there and watched like an idiot. When she finally noticed me, her expression changed. She was surprised, but not in a good way. She walked up to me, smiling, and said, "Hi, what are you doing here?" "Thought I'd surprise you," I said, trying to keep my voice even. "Looks like you're busy." She looked back at Mike, who nodded at me but didn't bother to introduce himself. "Oh, yeah, Mike was just helping me with my uniform. You should join us sometime." I smiled forcibly and replied, "Yeah, maybe." But inside I felt like I was falling apart. After that, I couldn't stop thinking about it. Every time she left for the gym, I wondered if she was really working out or spending time with Mike. I began to notice other changes as well. The way she dressed a little more than usual before going out, the way she spritzed on expensive perfume even though she was just going to wipe the sweat off herself. And then there were the evenings when she'd come home later than usual, claiming she'd stayed in to stretch out or have a drink with friends. One night I asked her point blank, "Were you with Mike?" She froze for half a second, long enough to confirm my suspicions, before replying, "No, of course not. Why are you even asking that?" I wanted to believe her. I really did. But the more I thought about it, the more the details didn't add up. It wasn't just Mike anymore. It was the way she changed, the way she pulled away every time I tried to get close. I started checking her social media, something I'd never done before. Most of her posts were innocuous. Workout photos, random selfies, but almost every one of them had comments from Mike. He'd write, "You look strong," or, "As always, on point." She always responded with an emoji or "Thanks, Mike." It shouldn't have been a big deal, but I felt like it was. It felt like I was losing her, little by little, to someone else. And the worst part? I didn't know how to talk about it, lest I sound paranoid or controlling. So I kept quiet, hoping she would prove me wrong, hoping I was just overthinking things. But deep down, I knew the truth. I just wasn't ready to face it yet. I'd never been the type to go through someone's cell phone. To be honest, the idea had seemed obsessive before, like I was breaking an unspoken rule of trust. But that night, everything changed. I wasn't planning on looking. I didn't want to find anything, but I did. And once I saw it, there was no turning back. It started out as a normal evening. I was sitting at home waiting for Kayla to come home from her usual late workout at the gym. I decided to order takeout since I wasn't in the mood to cook. When I reached for my phone to place my order, I realized it was dead. I looked for a charger on the kitchen table, but it was nowhere to be found. That's when I noticed Kayla's phone lying nearby. I hesitated. Borrowing her phone seemed harmless, just a quick call to order a pizza, right? But as soon as I picked it up, the screen lit up, and that's when I saw it. A notification from Mike. "Can't wait to see you tomorrow, winking face," it read. My stomach clenched. It wasn't the first time I'd seen his name, but I'd always convinced myself it was nothing. According to her, they were just gym buddies. He was just helping her with her workouts. But this wasn't like gym talk. I tried to brush it off. Maybe it was an inside joke. Maybe I was making too much sense. But before I knew it, my thumb was over the notification. I clicked on it. A feed of messages opened up, and what I saw made my heart drop. It wasn't just one flirtatious message. It was a string of messages written weeks, maybe months ago. There were winking emojis, compliments on how amazing she looked, and plans to meet up outside the gym. One message from her stood out like a neon sign. "Can't wait for Saturday. I'll finally have the house to myself." Winking face. Saturday. The day I planned to go visit my mom. I scrolled further, my hands shaking. The messages painted a picture I didn't want to see. They talked about their chemistry, about how good it felt to be around each other. They talked about inside jokes, shared songs, and even what they would do when they were free to really be together. I felt like I was going to throw up. My mind was churning, trying to make sense of it all. Had I really missed the signs? Had I ignored my instincts for so long that I had let this happen right under my nose? The worst part was the photos. Among them were a few selfies Mike had sent, shirtless, with suspenders, with captions like, "This is for you." But what shocked me the most were the photos Kayla sent back. They weren't explicit, but they were intimate enough to make it clear that this wasn't just a casual friendship. I hung up the phone, and my chest ached. The room felt smaller, like the walls had closed in around me. I couldn't stay still and paced around the kitchen, trying to calm myself down. But no matter how hard I tried, the images and messages kept replaying in my head. What hurt the most was not just the betrayal, but the realization that she had been lying to me for months. Every time I'd asked about Mike, every time she'd assured me he was just a friend, she'd lied right to my face. And while I was exhausted from taking care of my mom, she was secretly seeing him. I sat at the table, resting my head on my hands. Part of me wanted to confront her as soon as she walked through the door, throw my phone in front of her, and demand answers. But another part of me wasn't ready. I needed time to think, to process what I had just learned. The more I thought about it, the angrier I got. It wasn't just about her cheating. It was about everything she put me through. The nursing home arguments, her obsession with money, the way she made me feel like the bad guy for trying to take care of my mom. It all made sense now. It wasn't my decisions that upset her. It was the fact that they weren't doing her any good. She was distancing herself not because of stress, but because she had already given up on our relationship. When Kayla finally came home that evening, I couldn't even look at her. She walked in, smiling, and kissed me on the cheek like nothing had happened. "How was your day?" she asked, setting her gym bag by the door. I forced myself to act normal. "It was fine," I said in an even voice. She didn't seem to notice anything. She went about her usual business, chatting about the workout and what new exercises Mike had suggested. Every word she said felt like another knife in my chest. I wanted to challenge her right here and now, to tell her I knew everything. But I couldn't do that, not yet. I needed time to figure out what I was going to say, how I was going to handle this. That night I hardly slept at all. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling and going over all the messages in my head. I asked myself how we got to this point. How did the woman I thought I would spend the rest of my life with turn into someone I didn't even recognize? The next morning, I made a decision. I wasn't going to let this drag on. I deserved answers, and I deserved better than what she was giving me. But even as I planned how to confront her, some part of me still hoped I was wrong, that there was some explanation for all of this. Maybe she would tell me that all was not as it seemed at first glance. Deep down, however, I knew the truth. And no matter what she said, nothing could undo the damage already done. I hadn't planned for things to turn out as horribly as they did. I thought I could keep my cool, keep my composure, and get the answers I needed without losing my temper. But when you stare betrayal in the face, it does something to you. Rationality takes a back seat and emotion takes the wheel. That night, I learned what kind of rage I was capable of. It started after a sleepless night of going over everything I could think of in my head. I couldn't keep pretending everything was okay. Every moment spent in the same house with Kayla, when I pretended to know nothing, felt like a betrayal to myself. I deserved answers. I deserved the truth. She came home from work that night, tired but chipper, like everything was fine. Watching her act so at ease, so normal, while I fell apart was like adding fuel to an already blazing fire. I decided I wasn't going to wait any longer. "Kayla," I said, my voice calm but firm, "we need to talk." She looked up from her bag, raising her eyebrows. "Sure. What's up?" I gestured for her to sit down. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest and adrenaline rushing through my veins. I ordered myself to remain calm, but as soon as the words left my mouth, I felt anger boil up inside me. "I know about Mike," I said, watching her face carefully. For a split second, her expression froze. Then she quickly came to her senses and made the calm, innocent face she always used when she wanted to defuse the situation. "What about Mike?" she said in a light, almost dismissive tone. I pulled out my phone, opened the screenshots I'd taken of her messages, and held them out to her across the table. "This, about him." She stared at the screen, her face losing color. Her mouth opened and closed like she was searching for the right words, but nothing came out. Finally, she looked up at me with eyes that read guilt. "It's not what it looks like," she said, her voice shaking. I laughed bitterly. "Really? Because it looks like you've been sneaking around with him behind my back for months. It looks like you've been lying to my face every single day. She started to say something, but I interrupted her. Don't you dare lie to me, Kayla. I saw the messages. I've seen everything. Just tell me the truth for once. Just then the floodgates opened. She started crying, mumbling excuses about being ignored and not being heard. She said I was so focused on Mom that I didn't have time for her anymore, that she felt like she was in a relationship with a ghost. And Mike? I asked, raising my voice. What? He flew in and became your emotional support buddy. Did you think that gave you the right to betray me? She nodded, tears streaming down her face. He listened to me, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. He made me feel like I mattered. Those words struck me like a punch to the gut. She mattered to me. She'd always mattered. But instead of talking to me, instead of trying to figure things out together, she turned to someone else. As we argued, the situation escalated. I couldn't sit and listen to her excuses anymore, so I grabbed my jacket and headed out the door. I didn't even know where I was going. I just needed to get out of there. Without hesitation, I drove to the gym. It was late, but I knew there was a chance Mike would still be there. Part of me hoped he wouldn't be there, but another part of me wanted nothing more than to see him face to face. When I pulled into the parking lot, he was standing by his car looking through his phone. The fact that he was standing there so casually, as if he wasn't the one who had just ruined my relationship, made my blood boil. I got out of the car and headed straight for him. He looked up as I approached, and his expression changed from confused to defensive in a matter of seconds. Are you Mike? I asked, my voice cold. Yes, he answered cautiously. Who's asking? I'm Kayla's boyfriend, I said, watching his face carefully. As soon as I said those words, his eyes widened. Look, kid, he started, raising his hands. I don't want any trouble. It's too late for that, I said, stepping closer. You've been messing around with my girlfriend. Do you have any idea what you've done? He tried to back away, mumbling something about not knowing we were still together, but I wasn't buying it. The rage I'd been holding back for weeks finally exploded. Before I knew it, I grabbed him by the collar and pushed him toward the car. He tried to push me away, but I was on pure adrenaline. You think you can just walk into someone else's life and take what you want? I shouted, clenching my fist. He stammered out some feeble excuse, but I didn't let him finish. I swung around, and my fist smashed into his jaw. He jerked backward, grabbing his face, but I wasn't done yet. I grabbed him again, pushing him harder this time, and he fell to the ground. It was only when I saw the fear in his eyes that I realized how far I'd come. My hands shook and my breathing became ragged. For a second I wondered if I should hit him again, but then I saw my reflection in his car window. I didn't recognize the guy looking back at me. I stepped back, my chest heaving. Stay away from her, I said through clenched teeth. If I ever see you around her again, you'll regret it. He nodded quickly, jumped to his feet, and backed away like a frightened animal. I turned and walked back to the car, my hands still shaking as I gripped the steering wheel. As I drove home, I didn't feel any better. Even worse. The confrontation with him hadn't brought me relief. It had only left me with a feeling of emptiness. I'd let my anger take over, and now all I had to do was pick up the pieces of a shattered relationship. When I returned to the house, Kayla was already waiting for me, her eyes red with tears. I didn't say a word to her. I just grabbed my bag, gathered my clothes, and walked out the door. That night I realized there was no turning back. Kayla had broken something between us that couldn't be fixed, and I wasn't sure I could ever forgive her, or myself, for what had happened. After that night, I couldn't look at her the same way anymore. Every time I saw Kayla, her words echoed in my head. He listened to me. He made me feel like I mattered. And even worse, the messages from Mike, the plans they'd made while I was trying to get my life together. It seemed every moment of our relationship was now marred by a betrayal I hadn't expected. For the first few days, I didn't know what to do with myself. I stayed at a friend's house, barely eating or sleeping, trying to sort out the mess in my head. Part of me wanted to call her, yell at her, demand answers she'd probably never give. But the other part of me was just fed up. I didn't want to hear her voice. I didn't want to give her the satisfaction of explaining why she felt she had the right to act the way she did. But life doesn't stop because your world is falling apart. My mom still needed me. I still needed to work. And at some point, I had to see Kayla again. When I finally got back to the house, everything seemed unreal. Her car was parked in the driveway like everything was normal. But when I stepped inside, the air felt heavier. She was sitting at the kitchen table, her eyes puffy from crying. I'd seen her cry before, but this time it didn't move me. I didn't feel sorry for her. I just felt tired. "I'm glad you're home," she said, her voice soft. "We need to talk." "Yes, we do," I said, dropping my bag by the door. We sat down across from each other, and an awkward silence hung between us. I let her speak first because I wanted to hear what she had to say. "I've been thinking about everything," she began, her hands frantically gripping the edge of the table. "About us, about what happened. I know I messed up. I know I hurt you." She looked at me, expecting me to say something, but I didn't. I just stared at her, waiting for her to get to the point. "I didn't mean for it to be this bad," she continued. "Mike, it didn't have to mean anything. I was just lonely. You were so focused on Mom, on selling the house, on everything but us. I felt like you didn't care anymore." I clenched my jaw, trying to contain my emotions. "So your solution was to cheat on me?" Her face crinkled, but I didn't let her tears stop me. "You could have talked to me, Kayla. You could have told me how you felt. But instead, you lied to me. You went behind my back. Do you even realize what you did?" "I understand," she said quickly. "I know I hurt you, and I'm sorry. It's just, I didn't feel like we were building anything anymore. It felt like we were stuck, that we had no future." That hit me harder than I'd expected. There was no future? I repeated, raising my voice. "We talked about getting married, starting a family. I did everything I could to take care of my mom and keep our relationship going. But apparently that wasn't enough for you." She hesitated, then looked down at her hands. I thought we'd be far away by now. I thought we'd have a house. Maybe we'd even be planning a wedding. But instead, all the money is going into taking care of your mom. And I understand that, okay? I do. But I couldn't shake the feeling that we'd never have the life we wanted." Her honesty hit me like a slap in the face. It wasn't just about her cheating. It was about her not wanting to be a part of the life I was trying to build, a life that included taking care of my mom. "So let me get this straight," I said, my voice cold. "You're angry because I didn't prioritize buying a house or planning a wedding over taking care of my mom. You're upset because you weren't going to benefit from the sale of her house. Is that what this is about?" She didn't answer right away, but the look on her face told me everything I wanted to know. "Unbelievable," I muttered, standing up and pacing around the room. "You don't even regret what you did, do you? You're just sorry you got caught." "It's not fair," she said, her voice shaking. "I am sorry. I needed to feel like I was important. Like we were important. And you think that by fucking Mike, you became important?" I shot back, my anger boiling over. "All it did was show me who you really are." The silence that followed was deafening. She looked at me, her face expressing guilt and despair, but I didn't care anymore. I'd been trying to keep us together for too long to realize that she didn't want to be held back. "I can't do this," I finally said, my voice hollow. "I can't be with someone who doesn't have my back, with someone who only cares about what he can get out of this relationship." "Please," she said, her voice trailing off. "Don't say that. We can fix this. I'll do whatever it takes." But it was too late. Everything we had, all the love I had for her, was gone. She'd taken it and shattered it into pieces I couldn't put back together. "I'm done, Kayla," I said, heading for the door. "I'll be back for my stuff. You can keep the house. It doesn't matter anymore." As I walked out of the house, I felt a strange mix of emotions: danger, sadness, relief. I had spent so much time trying to make her happy, trying to build a future with her, but I realized she didn't care about the same things I did. It wasn't just the betrayal that broke us, it was the fact that we weren't on the same team, and probably never had been. Leaving wasn't that hard. It's something they don't tell you. Leaving is like ripping off a Band-Aid. It hurts like hell, but it's over quickly. It's what comes after, though, that drags on and tests you in ways you never expected. That's exactly the position I found myself in after leaving Kayla and everything we'd built or thought we'd built behind. For the first week, I stayed at a friend's house. Matt is one of those guys who never asks too many questions, but always knows when you need a beer and someone to sit quietly with. He let me get comfortable on his couch, minded his own business, just handed me a cold bottle and said, "Whenever you're ready, man." At first I thought I'd be ready right away. I'd tell him everything, vent all my anger and resentment and spew them out. But when I opened my mouth, nothing came out. It wasn't that I didn't trust Matt. It was that saying it all out loud made it all too real. The texts, the lies, the betrayal. Admitting how long I'd been blind to it, how much I'd ignored the signs, was like admitting I was a fool. Instead, I focused on practical things. I needed to figure out what to do next. First, there was the house. Technically, we were renting it together, but the lease was in my name. I wasn't going to fight her on that. I told her she could stay until the lease was up, but I would be stopping by to pick up my stuff. The first trip back was brutal. Walking into a place that used to be ours and seeing how quickly it had become hers alone was a punch to the gut. She had rearranged the furniture, put my things in boxes in the corner as if I was some sort of overstaying guest. She wasn't around when I came in, which was even better. I didn't want to see her. I didn't want to hear her apologies or excuses. I just wanted to get my things and leave. As I packed, I found little reminders of our life together, pictures of us smiling during vacations, notes she wrote me when things were good, the stupid coffee mug she gave me for Christmas that said, "World's Greatest Guy." At some point I had to sit down and just sigh. I was hurting not only from the betrayal, but from losing everything I thought we had. After gathering my things, I loaded them into my car and drove away without looking back. The next few weeks were spent wondering how I was going to move on with my life. I moved into a small one-bedroom apartment closer to my mom's nursing home. It wasn't much, but it was mine. For the first time in years, I didn't have to compromise with anyone on how to decorate the apartment or what groceries to buy. It was freeing in a way, but lonely at the same time. My mom was my anchor during this time, even though she didn't fully understand what I was going through. Her memory was getting worse by the day, and there were times she didn't recognize me when I came to see her. But even on the bad days, just sitting with her, holding her hand and listening to her tell old stories, some real, some not, I was reminded of what really mattered. I chose to be there for her. I visited her as often as I could, made sure she had everything she needed, and that the nursing home staff treated her well. It gave me a sense of purpose, something to focus on besides my own pain. But at night, when the house got quiet and it was just me and my thoughts, the weight of everything that was happening came over me. I remembered every argument Kayla and I had, every time she mentioned Mike, every little red flag I ignored. I asked myself how I could have been so blind. The truth was, I wanted to believe in her. I wanted to believe that we were building something real, that she was the person I thought she was. And maybe, in the beginning, she was. But somewhere along the way, she changed. Or maybe I just started to realize what she really was. At the time, I was leaning on my friends a lot. Matt, of course, and also Jake and Tyler, two guys I'd known since college. They dragged me to bars, made me watch bad action movies, and reminded me that life wasn't over just because one relationship crashed and burned. "You dodged a bullet," Jake said one night after one too many beers. "Better to find out now than later when you marry her and have kids. Imagine going through her cheating while juggling diapers and daycare." He wasn't wrong, but that didn't make it hurt any less. Slowly, I began to feel like myself again. I took up old hobbies I had abandoned. Video games, hiking, even tried my hand at cooking. I reconnected with friends I hadn't seen in forever because I was too immersed in my relationship to make time for them. And all the while, I reminded myself that this wasn't the end. Kayla has taken a lot from me. My trust, my sense of security, but not everything. I still have family, friends, and the opportunity to rebuild. One day when I was visiting my mom, she had a rare moment of clarity. She looked at me and said, "You're a good boy. You know that? Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." This struck me harder than I expected. She probably didn't even know what I was going through, but her words stuck with me. I wasn't perfect, but I did the best I could. I loved Kayla with everything I had, and if that wasn't enough for her, That was on her conscience, not mine. Picking up the pieces wasn't easy, and I'm still working on it. There are days when anger and sadness creep back into my soul, when I wonder if I will ever be able to fully trust someone again. But there are also days when I feel hopeful, when I remember that life has a way of surprising you when you least expect it. For now, I'm taking things for granted, and honestly, that's enough. Looking back, I realize that some lessons can only be learned the hard way. I wouldn't wish what I went through on anyone, but it also made me look at things differently, at love, trust, and what's really important in life. When Kayla and I first started dating, I thought love was enough. I thought that if two people cared about each other, everything else would fall into place. But life works differently. Love is important, yes, but it's not the whole picture. It's like building a house. You can't just put a coat of paint on and consider it done. You need a solid foundation, something that will hold up when the going gets tough. What I didn't notice at the time was that our foundation was shaky from the start. Kayla and I didn't have the same priorities, even though we pretended we did. I thought we were building a future together, but for her it was always about the next step, the next milestone. The wedding, the house, the perfect Instagram-worthy life. And when life threw us steep twists and turns, my mom's illness, difficult financial decisions, she was unwilling to weather the storm with me. I realized that true love isn't just about the good times. It's about supporting each other when things fall apart, having each other's backs no matter what. Kayla showed me that she didn't want to do that, and as much as it hurt me, I'm glad I found out right when I did. Trust is another thing I took for granted. I used to think that trust comes automatically, that you give to someone once you've fallen in love with them. But now I know that it has to be earned and protected. It's not just being faithful, it's being honest, showing up when it matters. Kayla violated my trust in a way that still hurts me to think about. She didn't just cheat on me. She lied, manipulated, and put her own needs first. It made me question myself, wonder if I was too trusting, too naive. But here's the thing. I don't want to become cynical or paranoid. I want to trust again, but next time, I'll make sure it's someone who deserves it. One of the hardest lessons I've learned is boundaries. When you're in a relationship, it's very easy to let your own needs and values take a backseat, especially if you're a people pleaser like me. I spent so much time trying to make Kayla happy, trying to keep the peace, that I lost sight of what was important to me. I should have defended my point of view sooner, about my mom, about money, about the support I needed. Now I know better. I know that my priorities, my family, my values, my sense of self, are non-negotiable. The right person will respect that, and they will bring their own priorities to the table so we can build something real together. If there's one piece of advice I want to give to anyone reading this, it's to pay attention to the little things. The way a man talks about money, how he handles stress, how he treats the people in his life who can't do anything for him. These are the things that show you who he really is. Don't ignore the red flags and hope that things will change. People can certainly evolve, but they have to want to. Another thing I've learned is the importance of self-esteem. When Kayla cheated on me, it was like a punch to the gut, like I wasn't good enough. But her act wasn't really about me, it was about her. Her insecurity, her selfishness, her inability to commit to something bigger than herself. It took me a long time to realize this, but it made me stronger. I finally realized how important it was to surround myself with the right people. My friends and family were my lifeline when things fell apart. They reminded me of who I am, what I deserve, and helped me pick up the pieces. I will always be grateful to them for that. So what's wrong with me now? Honestly, I'm still figuring it out. I'm in no rush to get into a new relationship, but I'm not shutting myself off either. I have a better understanding of what I want and what I won't settle for, and that's a step in the right direction. Life is messy and people are complicated. But even after everything I've been through, I still believe in love. I still believe there is someone out there who will support me in my time of need, who will build a life with me based on mutual respect and trust. For now, I'm focused on the things that matter. Being there for my mom, taking care of myself, and living a life I can be proud of. And if you are reading this and experiencing something similar, know that you are not alone. It's okay to be sick. It's okay to be angry. It's okay to take your time. But don't forget your worth. You deserve someone who sees it too. It's funny how life keeps moving no matter how much you think it has stopped. After everything that happened with Kayla, there were times when I thought I would never get over it. The betrayal, the lies, the way it made me question everything about myself, all of it left scars that I thought I would carry inside me forever. But here I am, I'm still standing. The truth is, healing isn't some grand cinematic moment where you suddenly feel great again. It's a slow, messy process full of stops and starts. Some days you wake up and feel like you've figured out the world. Other days it takes all your energy just to get out of bed. But as time goes on, those bad days become fewer and fewer. For me, healing started with the little things. I dove headfirst into work, taking on new projects and tasks that occupied my mind. I work in information technology, which means my job involves problem solving, something I've always been good at. Focusing on work gave me a sense of purpose when everything else seemed unmanageable. Outside of work, I started taking up a hobby I hadn't touched in years. I pulled on my old hiking boots and got out on the trails on weekends, enjoying the quiet and fresh air. I even signed up for a cooking class, something I'd always joked about but had never tried. Turns out I'm not so bad at making lasagna. But the most important part of my healing was reconnecting with my mom. After moving closer to the nursing home, I made it a habit to visit her as often as I could. Sometimes we would sit and talk about the past, my father, our family holidays, how I was caught sneaking around with a girl in high school. Other days we just sat in cozy silence, watching the birds outside her window. Her memory isn't what it used to be, but her spirit is still strong. Even on the bad days, she has a way of reminding me of what is truly important. Family, kindness, doing the right thing, even when it's hard, are the values she raised me on, and those are the ones I try to stick to in everything I do. Spending more time with her made me realize how much I had let my relationship with Kayla overshadow my priorities. Don't get me wrong, I loved Kayla, or at least I loved the version of her I thought I knew. But looking back, I can see how often I compromised for her, how often I put her needs before my own and my family's. It was unhealthy and unfair to both of us. I also learned to be kinder to myself. For a long time, I berated myself for what had happened. I asked myself why I didn't notice the warning signs sooner, why I wasn't enough for her, why I let her take advantage of my trust. But the truth was, none of it was on my conscience. Kayla had made her choice, and that choice reflected her nature, not mine. My focus now is on building a life that feels authentic to me. I've started setting boundaries and being more careful about choosing the people I let into my life. I want relationships, romantic, platonic, or familial, to be built on mutual respect and understanding. No more one-sided compromises, no more chasing after people who don't value me. As for dating, I'm in no hurry to go anywhere. I've had a few casual dates, but now I'm enjoying the freedom of being single. It's nice to take my time, figure out what I really want, and not try to make someone else happy. If there's one thing I've learned from all of this, it's that healing isn't about erasing the past, but learning from it. I'm not the same person I was when I was with Kayla anymore, and that's a good thing. I'm stronger now, more aware of myself, more aware of what I need and what I deserve. I still think about her sometimes, but it's different now. The pain isn't as sharp and the anger has subsided. Instead, I feel a strange sense of gratitude, not for what she did, but for what she taught me. She showed me what I don't want in a partner, what I won't tolerate, and what needs to be prioritized in my life. As I look to the future, I feel hopeful. My career is thriving, my relationship with my mom is stronger than ever, and I'm finally starting to feel like myself again. The scars are still there, of course, but they don't define me. They're just part of my story, a story that's still being written. And if you're reading this while going through something similar, know that it gets better. It's not easy and it's not quick, but you'll get through it. Focus on what's important, lean on the people who love you, and don't forget your worth. Life has the ability to surprise you when you least expect it, and the best chapters are yet to come.